Hello, students. Today we are going to discuss about our new chapter, international organizations. International organization can be defined as an international legal entity, uh, like where there is a need for a treaty, or it should be governed by international law. So that's how international organizations are formed. There can be of two types. It can be intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations that we are going to discuss later. But first, we are going to discuss about why we need international organizations. Well, I think this question is very kind of it's irrelevant at this kind of medical crisis or endemic or pandemic, whatever you call it, because we can see how international organizations are actually coordinating or United Nations from the top is coordinating the fight for coronavirus around the world. So, rightly told by Dag Hammarskjöld, the second UN Secretary General, like we don't have United Nations or any other international organizations to save humanity, but it only saves us from hell. That means it can only try to make our life more comfortable, but it may not be the only solution or the perfect solution for all the problems that we are facing. So anyhow, some of the reasons why we need international organizations is help. It helps with the matters of war and peace. War means they can even help in the post-war reconstruction. That is one of the advantages of having international organization, and it can definitely maintain international peace and security. And as clearly given in this globalized world, it is the need of the hour. And globalization, which has led to development in the world, but also you can see there are threats. It can be from terrorism or it can be from virus or whatever, but that shows we are interdependent on each other. And definitely that takes us to the next point. It helps in producing information and ideas. So information that we are sharing with the whole world and the world is sharing with India because of this coronavirus threat, that shows we need a platform to discuss our problems. And I do remember, I think Shashi Tharoor used to say, rather than having war and war, it's better to have jaw and jaw. That means it's better to discuss, debate, and criticize each other's ideas rather than going for a war. So these are some of the reasons why we are having international organization. And as we already discussed, it can help us to cooperate in security, law, economic, social matters, diplomacy. Security means it helps in providing a common security platform for all the countries. We do have that through maybe peacekeeping forces, or even United Nations is having its own military. And as far as law is concerned, it can definitely form its own law as it's there in UN Charter. It can provide a legal framework for all the nations, and which can be a part of international law. Economics, we know how we are like uh, how World Bank and IMF is kind of a common bridge for the development of economies of so many countries. Social matters, definitely, we can always talk about UNESCO, the specialized agency of United Nations, how it is helping in education, cultural, and so on. So these are some of the reasons we need to have international organization. When it comes to international organization, uh, there are two views: realism versus liberalism. Again, we are still discussing the need. And realists, there are some thinkers who are realist, and there are some thinkers who are liberalist, like Locke and all. Realist, they believe like state are more powerful, and they will never ever see to international institution, isn't it? And the example that is given over here, how States keeps on playing as an hegemony, isn't over here you can see. So United States is known for superseding all the directives given by United Nations, whether we talk about the Gulf War, even though it was not authorized by United Nations, but they went ahead after passing a resolution in the Congress that we have already discussed, isn't it? And that shows for some countries, like powerful countries, United Nations may not have any influence, or it won't be able to control. It is mainly to control the developing and the weaker countries. That's what realist thinkers believe in. And we do have another view, as I told you before, liberalism. They believe now we are so much interdependent, it is not possible for any country to live in isolation. And as it is clearly given over here, there is a construction of global legal and political system, isn't it? And if we want to protect all human beings, or maybe the whole humanity or humankind, we need to have this cooperation based on mutual interest. So in modernization, definitely they're talking about how technology has been instrumental in bringing the nations together. So that also shows we need to have an international organization, kind of a bridge between so many nations. So these are some of the reasons why we are having. And continuing with that, as I already discussed, how we are interdependent on each other. Each state is interdependent. So we need to have international organization, or we need to have kind of a multilateral approach to the problems that we are facing. So these are the reasons why we are having international organizations. As I discussed before, there are intergovernmental organizations, and we know one of the biggest, and the biggest in the world, is United Nations, UNO. We do have ASEAN as an example for intergovernmental organization, and where states come together. As I told you, they create this international legal personality, and they try to work together. And they do have a formal instrument of agreement. And as far as United Nations is concerned, we will discuss later. There is something called UN Charter. I'm just trying to write with the mouse, as I promised you, till I connect my stylus pen with this. Till then, you have to somehow manage with this. UN Charter is there, and that is kind of a formal agreement between these 193 countries. And as far as classification of international organization is concerned, we do have NGOs. You must be aware of it, non-governmental organizations. The examples are quite obvious: Red Cross and Greenpeace, which is working across the frontiers. Um, and as it is clearly given, they do have some specific issue. You know that in Red Cross, it's mainly for helping. They kind of are doctors beyond frontiers, isn't it? They help. They provide medical aid to war-torn nations and all. Greenpeace, they are trying to fight this nuclear threat. You must be knowing how it is threatening the whole biodiversity, and how it is polluting our marine life. And so they're fighting. And you must have seen how many times they, especially during environment day and all, World Environment Day, they have demonstrations around the world to save the environment. So these are some examples, and just letting you know, this is one of the ways to classify international organizations. And as discussed before, there is United Nations, which is the most popular and most powerful international organization, and it falls within the classification intergovernmental organization, established October 24th. Is a very, very important date as far as examinations are concerned. CBSE, many times they ask in different ways when it is when United Nations came into effect or the UN Charter came into effect, or which day is known as UN Day, United Nations Day. So that is October 24th. So October 24th is celebrated as UN Day because UN Charter came into effect. Headquartered in New York City, most of the physical presence of United Nations you will find in USA. So one of the examples being the headquarter itself is in New York, isn't it? One of the biggest cities in USA. And they do have regional offices in Geneva, that's in Switzerland, Vienna, Austria, Nairobi, that's in Kenya. So these are the regional offices which coordinate with the headquarter that is in New York City. Present Secretary General is Antonio Guterres. Another important point that you should highlight or you should be noting down, because again they ask in the one marker. And it's not only about one marker or about the examination. We should know who is the President Secretary General. That is Antonio Guterres, and he is from Portugal. That takes us to the next slide. So this I already discussed how United Nations is the most powerful and most popular predecessor to this popular international organization, and it has more influence in the world compared to any other organization, whether you talk about ASEAN, SAARC, and so on, because around 193 countries are members. That means almost the whole world. I'm saying out of 197, 193 countries have um taken the membership of United Nations. That shows its extent. So established in 20th century, we are talking about both League of Nations and United Nations. League of Nations definitely failed, whatever be the reason, maybe the policy of appeasement, like when Italy occupied Ethiopia, if I'm not wrong, 1935 or something, and when Japan occupied Manchuria. So, League of Nations was quite silent. It did not take any action. So that is why one of the reasons why League of Nations failed, as it is clearly given. It was formed by Treaty of Versailles. You must be knowing, very controversial. One of the reasons League of Nations failed because that so the seats for the rise of Adolf Hitler. So it was disbanded in 1946. That is after Second World War, and now United Nations is the present international organization, as we discussed, the most powerful and prominent in the world. Aims, it's very obvious that is the reason, because it came just after Second World War. The main purpose of United Nations was obviously maintaining international peace and security, isn't it? It's also given in our own constitution, that is in Article 31 of DPSP, Directive Principal State Policy. We have taken directly from here only. So the main reason, as prescribed by United Nations Charter, is to maintain international peace and security, and definitely it kind of a framework for establishing friendly relations among nations. It helps in international cooperation, as I already told you. Rather than having having war and war, we can have jaw and jaw, discussing and debating and critiquing each other, rather than fighting a physical war with each other. So that was another reason why we are having United Nations. This I already told you. It is most international represented. Almost 193 countries are there, and together with them, I think there are two observer nations also. which are not given full-fledged membership. One is State of Palestine, and one more. I forget the name. That's in Rome. Um, Let me see if I can recall. Maybe it can be why I'm trying to recall. The reason being, it can be asked in your like whether it's your board examination or even civil service examination. This reminds me, like in civil service examination, at least three questions are definitely they ask from international organization, that is United Nations. So I do remember that is Holy See, HOLYSEE. That is another state which is having observer status. That is Rome. Holy See, I hope you can make out. That is HOLYSEE. So, so these are the two states that are having observation status. So observer status. So that you can make out how popular international United Nation is. So we go for the next slide, and around 51 member states, including India, was the original member of or founding member of United Nations. Even though India, just see, we already talked about like 1945. That means India was not independent yet, but still it got that assurance from Britishers they will be exiting India. So India was seen as a full-fledged member, original member of the United Nations from 1945 onwards. And as the number grew to 193 in 2011, and the reason they are saying from 1960s onwards, the membership has shown a upward growth. The reason being decolonization, because many countries from Africa and Asia, including India, became independent. So many countries actually, after the end of Second World War, became independent because it was difficult for colonizers to continue with their rule over this developing countries. So more and more countries they kept on joining United Nations, and the number went up to 193 in 2011. This is just for factual information. UN is having six principal organs: General Assembly that works as World Parliament, Security Council, just like we are having head of the executive, or it's kind of head of the executive only. It is taking care of the administration. Security Council, it do have their own bureaucracy that is working for them, just like in our country or any other country. They will have bureaucrats who work for the executive. They do have Economic and Social Council. We discussed a bit about that, how it takes care of the economic and social needs of developing countries. And this became quite popular after these developing countries joined the United Nations, because then development became the major focus of United Nations. There was a trusteeship council. Now it has become defunct. I think from 2009 onwards. I will confirm it. I think in one of the slides I mentioned that, because trusteeship council was for some colonies. They used to administer some colonies. Now, as there are no colonies, they thought there is no need for trusteeship council. That's why it has become defunct. We do have International Court of Justice, as any country is having their own Supreme Court, like India is having, USA is having its own federal court. Similarly, International Court of Justice is there, which looks into the violation of any international policy or law, and it adjudicates on that. We have UN Secretariat. So they do have even specialized agencies like World Bank, World Health Organization, World Food Program. They do have their own portfolios or their own field of working. As most of the international organizations are seen as kind of the whole reason for them coming to existence is the function. We call it functionism, like how one function or one issue or one purpose creates organization. So one of the purpose of United Nations is to take care of the developing world, that is the third world. So they are definitely doing it through WHO. You must have seen how WHO, what role they are playing, very critical role right now because of the outbreak of coronavirus. They are coordinating all the health agencies in the world, isn't it? So that is another, and World Food Program, especially during natural calamities, whether it is famine or whatever, they organize the supply of food and all, especially in Africa, Ethiopia and all, which is still facing malnutrition. UNESCO, they we have many UNESCO approved sites, authenticated sites in India also, like Hampi and all, Taj Mahal. They declare them as World Heritage. So it becomes kind of a responsibility of UNESCO to take care of those World Heritages. So that's what they are doing. UNICEF, Children Fund, and when you see different organs and different specialized agencies of United Nations, um, in one statement, we can say that they have different approaches to peace. It is not only like they are having one military under them and they are sending peacekeeping forces around the world to maintain peace, but there are ways, like if education, if they can promote education, if they can promote social development, somehow that leads to peace, isn't it? Domestically also, we must have studied, like in our academics, how every nation, if they develop, like that's why Scandinavian countries, they are doing so good in HDI, and they have seen if there is increase in HDI, that is Human Development Index, peace will definitely will be there. Like it is next to follow. So that's why I'm saying United Nations takes different approaches in establishing peace in the world. So that's why so many organs, and they do have different specialized agencies. This takes us to the next subtopic, that is reform of the United Nations post Cold War. And you know that during Cold War, United Nations was kind of very partial. It had kind of a partisan approach to any issue that it was facing. So we discussed about how during Gulf War and all, USA took the lead. It was not only not really United Nations, but it was USA. And anytime USA, USSR, or China, that is erstwhile USSR, will use their veto power to block any initiative from the United Nations, which they find can be quite detrimental to their interest. So that is what United Nation used to, like the personality it used to have this Cold War years. So things have changed post Cold War. That's why there is a demand for reforms in the United Nations, whether it is the structure and process, as you can see on the screen, and whether it is about jurisdiction of the organization, that has completely changed for better. So we will discuss one by one. The first issue is definitely reform of the organization structures and processes. So the reason, again, it is given very clearly, after 1945, or since 1945, the world has changed significantly. End of bipolarity, though it was in 1991, the collapse of Soviet Union, isn't it? But still, the world has changed. Now it is a unipolar world, or I should say, kind of a multipolar world, where there are so many countries, whether it is India, China, Brazil, Germany, who can actually call the shots in the world. I'm not saying they are as powerful as USA or China, but still, they fall in that league. So these are the reasons why they asked for structural changes in United Nations. That is end of bipolarity, unipolar world, and definitely there are no ideological difference between USA and Russia right now after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991. So before, all the issues, as I told you, was seen from the eyes of ideology. But now the times have changed. Ideology actually do not play a major role when they're discussing or debating any issue in United Nations. I'm not saying they're having kind of consensus in United Nations or Security Council. Still, it is better. It is faster. when they are digging on some solution to a problem, a global problem. Rise of China is another reason why there has to be a structural change, isn't it? Which used to be a developing country when United Nations came into the picture, 1945, and many new countries have joined United Nations. We discussed before how decolonization, the process of decolonization, has led to inception of so many countries, and that has expanded the scope and also the approach of United Nations. And definitely there are new challenges, and we will be a fool to ignore what is happening right now. Epidemics, you can see that, isn't it? Terrorism is another reason why United Nations needs to have a different structure and process. So what they are saying, Security Council does not reflect the contemporary political realities. So after that, whatever happened, the new countries have come up, and new, uh, like developing countries, they are almost in the throes of becoming developed nations. Their per capita is much higher, and they do deserve a seat in the Security Council and so on. That we will discuss later. Then what they used to think during Cold War era, most of the decisions were influenced by Western values, isn't? But now developing countries, whether it is China or India, like they do influence. I'm not saying each and every policy, but most of the international policies. And because being such a huge market, so they can always barter their influence, isn't it? So that is why. It is given now the influence of Western values have actually come down, or their influence. Then it lacks equitable distribution, isn't it? If you check out the structure, that is Security Council, most of the seats, like permanent seats, are not only most, I should say now 100%. China I could have included in a developing nation, but it's very hard to say when it has become such a economic giant to include them as a developing nation. So almost all the five seats, permanent seats in the Security Council, is held by powerful nations: UK, USA, China, France, and so on. So most of the changes that were proposed, it was by Kofi Annan in 1997, and he kind of built the platform for what should be the qualification of a new permanent or non-permanent member. That was a proposal made by him. First of all, it should be a major economic power. So if any country wants to be or aspiring to be a part of Security Council, they need to be a major economic power. So that's why even India uh, looks for a permanent seat in Security Council. It should be a major military power, isn't it? That is another criteria he prescribed for becoming a permanent member. One should be a substantial contributor to UN budget. So how much you're contributing, your percentage or proportionate to other countries, that will also decide whether you deserve a seat in the Security Council. Then it should be a big nation. I mean to see, say landscape or by territory, it should be quite big. That's why India, being the seventh largest nation in the world, it deserves to be a part of Security Council. That is a permanent member. And democracy, which has become the trend in the world, isn't it? Most of the countries, majority of the countries are democracy in the world. So a few exceptions are there, but they are not the rule for sure. And human rights, account or the record of any nation can define whether they deserve a seat in the United Nations Security Council or not. And they should definitely represent world's diversity. World's diversity means whether they are representing all the continents of the world. Isn't like from South America, I don't think there is any country. That's why Brazil is a front runner for that. And Asia being the biggest continent and such a huge population, only having China representing the whole of Asia, or even Japan. Uh, I'm not saying Japan is a part of like permanent seat in Security Council. What I'm trying to tell, Japan, being an ally of USA, cannot represent the interest of Asian countries. That's why India's name is proposed to be a part of Security Council together with Japan, Brazil, Germany, and so on. So next reform, sorry, we continue with the same structures and processes, and the change in process that they need is I discussed about the permanency of Security Council, and they want to abolish veto power. You must be knowing veto power is a negative vote by any of the five members, whether it is USA, UK, France, China, Russia. They can always, like, if any a solution to any issue that is detrimental or it is going against their own domestic interests, they can veto it. That means they have this prerogative vote that they can use anytime. So this is seen as quite discriminatory in nature. And you must be knowing Security Council is having not only permanent members, even non-permanent members. And permanent members are developed nations. So obviously they want increase in the seats of uh, non-permanent members of Security Council. I think only once, I don't remember the year, they changed from 11 to 15. So that was the last change they made, and with 193 countries representing the whole United Nations, they should definitely increase the number in even in non-permanent seats. Anyhow, the next what they want change in the process of the structure is better deal. Or sorry, in the change in process is better deal to non-permanent members. As I already discussed, they should take from developing countries because United Nations right now is playing a more developmental role, isn't it? It's not only about military. They're not sending military everywhere for sure. After like independence, like so many countries got independence from this colonial rule. The whole perspective has changed. United Nations, unlike League of Nations, is not only looking into the like looking everything from the same hourglass. That is using military or how to bring about a military solution for each and every problem. Now they need to have more human touch to their solutions, and the change in approach is definitely due to the increase in the membership of developing countries. So these are the reforms that were suggested for jurisdiction of the United Nations. So it was proposed in 2005 when they were celebrating the 60 years of its existence, United Nations. You know that we already discussed 1945 was the year when it came into existence. So by 2005, it was 60 years old. And they wanted some changes in the jurisdiction or the expansion of the jurisdiction, or I should say the change in the approach of United Nations or even the nature of United Nations functions. One is definitely peace building missions, isn't it? There should be a peace building commission, which is already there. So they should not only try to find peace when there is war or post or pre-war. They should have a strategy for that. Um, like even before starting of a war, they can somehow firewall it or they can stop a war. So and they can have confidence building measures between different nations. And even after the outbreak of war, they can build the peace, like which is destroyed. Like you can always compare if any country is destroyed by war, how they can somehow restructure or they can bring a structural transformation to that nation. It was actually done by Marshall Plan. I hope you remember after Second World War. USA pumped in so much of money in Western countries because Germany, France, they were destroyed by Second World War. So they tried to rebuild the whole Europe. Similarly, United Nations can play the role currently, and it can somehow try to build the peace in the world, not only looking for the peace after the war has broken, isn't it? So anyhow, after the outbreak of war, so international community's role in case of human rights violation. So they need a bigger role for United Nations as far as human rights violation is concerned, and together they should try to protect. But again, I've seen they have failed whenever any big nation is involved, whether it is China or USA, because even USA is accused of so many human rights violation after September 11 attack 2001, isn't it? Whether Guantanamo Bay or whatever, there were human rights violation, but nothing. Even ICJ looks powerless when it comes to superpowers. Similarly, China, even though there are human rights violation, Uyghur region, you know that province, how minority Muslims were exploited over there. They are tortured over there, and there is a different strategy to convert them. So and there is a complete lockdown of that area, but still United Nations is silent because China is a permanent member of Security Council. So the positive thing was they proposed Human Rights Council and it is operational since 19 June 2006. So there is UNHCR and all, and they are taking care of human rights violations or building up this thought in the member nations to protect the human rights of their citizens. Then another reform, they look into the jurisdiction, like what they need as far as jurisdiction is concerned is given through Millennium Development Goals, that is in 2000. And the focus was definitely third world nations. So as I told you, United Nations should not see every problem the solution cannot be only military. It can be something else. It can be development. It can be decreasing infant mortality and maybe malnutrition and so on. They can wipe out poverty in the world. That itself will lead to peace in the world. As we discussed a few minutes before, even improvement in human development index can lead to peace. So that should be the new approach of United Nations. That's why they are saying the jurisdiction of the United Nations should actually expand with so many developing countries struggling with this malnutrition and all. So these were some proposals given by MDG, that is Millennium Development Goals. Then terrorism being a definite threat to the world peace. So again, I think the coordination is done by Interpol, International Police, and that's what they want. The initiative should be taken by United Nations to somehow condemn terrorism around the world. As we discussed before, during Cold War, whether a state is a terrorist state or not, it was defined by ideological difference. Whether USA supporting Pakistan or Russia supporting another country, maybe it is known for promoting terrorism. But at that time, Pakistan cannot be blacklisted. So it is only since September 11 incident that USA changed the approach towards Pakistan. So what I mean to say, United Nations need to take definite steps to wipe out terrorism from the world, or at least it can coordinate the effort. And they can have a creation of a democracy fund. That means what they believe, as we discussed in one of the videos, democracy may not be the most ideal form of government, but still it is one of the best, and we can always call it the necessary evil. We don't have any other option, isn't it? We can't have authoritarian regimes in the world, and we can not think about peace if most of the countries are ruled by authoritarian regimes. So democracy is the best bet for the world, and that's what reform they are looking for as far as United Nations is concerned. They can have a democracy fund that can be financed by different members, and the money can be used to kind of promote democratic values and principles. And definitely agreement to wind up the trusteeship council, as it is already mentioned, it has become defunct since 1994. This is the year, as I was telling in previous slide, like 1994 is the year when they made it inactive. So now it is not working because there are no colonized countries in the world. We go for the next subtopic, why India deserves a seat in the United Nations, or what kind of reforms India is looking for, and do India really support any reforms in the United Nations? Definitely, India do support changes or transformation of United Nations, and it has always supported, as I told you, the developmental goals of United Nations, as it is clearly given, development and cooperation among states. India has been one of the you can say most audible and vociferous supporter of United Nations, because many a disputes that we had with Pakistan, we actually went to United Nations for finding a solution for it. Even though India being such a big military and economic power, it was easier for India. Like whether you talk about 1965 war, 1947 war, or 1971 war, India could have easily overwhelmed Pakistan, but still India went to United Nations. That shows India's trust towards United Nations, and the confidence they are having, United Nations can find a solution. And India definitely, like any other developing country, they support increase in the permanent and non-permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. And why India deserves a permanent seat, as India has been claiming for so many years, and I think even Nehru is accused of not accepting the seat. But again, it is very controversial to go into that debate whether India was ready or not. And India always saw China as a very good friend at that time. So India never knew China can backstab. So that was the reason China was offered the seat and not India. India being the second most populous country, and very soon it will overtake China. So seeing the impact of coronavirus, maybe it can be true. And India being the world's largest democracy, definitely in population. So India deserves a seat, because one of the criterion given, as we discussed before, was democracy. The country should follow democratic principles. So that shows India deserves a seat in United Nations Security Council as a permanent member. And India's contribution to UN budget is quite high. If it is, definitely it cannot be so high as USA, but it is quite substantial. And India's contribution even to peacekeeping forces, as Indian IPKF, you know that Indian peacekeeping forces, they are all around the world. I think maybe next to Bangladesh, even Bangladesh is one of the biggest contributors to peacekeeping forces, whether it is in Congo, Rwanda, and so on. So India definitely deserves a permanent seat, and there is no doubt about India being an economic giant. Definitely, right now India is going through a recession and a very bad slowdown, but still they believe India's manufacturing base, and like if you see kind of a big software developer in the world. And why I'm using that software developer, I'm not trying to showcase India's power, but what I'm trying to tell, maybe if the world depends on artificial intelligence, India can be one of the creator of this idea, isn't it? So possibility is there, it can contribute a lot to this idea of artificial intelligence in the future. So that's why India deserves a permanent seat, and definitely a powerful army, one of the biggest in the world. And definitely the weapons that we are manufacturing, and we are buying, and we are the biggest importer of arms in the world. So that is one of the reasons India deserves a seat in the permanent seat in the Security Council. And this is kind of a very disappointing picture for United Nations in this unipolar world, where USA stands as the only superpower. Okay, it depends what approach you're taking. Either if you're taking the approach of this world is not unipolar, it is multipolar, then this point is wrong. But still they say United States can do anything. So in a way, they are proving the realist right, isn't it? If you remember, we talked about the realism, and they used to say any country which is very powerful, this world organization may not matter to them. Whatever directives or whatever resolution they are passing, they may not follow that. They will breach that resolution. So that's what United States is doing. It is withdrawing from many of the treaties that were signed by them under uh, the aegis of United Nations. And definitely the economic and military power that USA is, they can always supersede UN decision. That there is no need to give any examples. Also, there are a plenty, and you can incorporate any of the examples over here, whether the war in Syria or war against Taliban. Like unilaterally, they have taken the lead, and they never felt the uh, reason to take United Nations into conference whenever they want to attack any country for their own gains, where it is oil politics or whatever. So they feel immune from United Nations directives, and definitely it is the single largest contributor to the UN budget. Mm, Still, even after withdrawing from so many agencies, I think still they are one of the biggest contributors to UN budget. They keep on saying United Nations cannot survive without the blood actually pumped in the United Nations veins by USA. So that somehow it showcases how powerful United States of America is, and how bigger, like how big contributor it is to UN budget. And one of the reasons is the physical presence of United Nations in US territory. We talked about that. New York is the headquarter for United Nations, and somehow um, that gives clout to, or political clout to, USA in the United Nations, and definitely veto power that nobody can challenge. USA uses at its will. I'm not saying veto power is used almost every day, maybe rarely, but it can be used for their own national interest rather than thinking about the world as a whole, isn't it? So that's it. And thanks for watching the video. It is quite, I can understand, quite a long uh, like video, but still, I just wanted to finish off this international organization topic rather than breaking into so many videos. I just made one video. And if you're having any doubts about any a topic, a subtopic that we discussed, you can always ping me through YouTube or any other media that you can find, like where I will be sharing this video with. Thanks a lot. Have a uh, nice day. Thank you.